I think like the biggest mistake that small companies, maybe big companies do is assume that everyone has seen everything they've done.
Oh, that's profound.
I think we should talk about it.
The Margeteers.
Hi, Margaret.
Hi, Marg. So we've reached the end of our budget series where we've broadly talked about, very, very, very broadly have talked about budget. Today, though, we want to talk about how to not waste your budget, or funny stories we've seen people waste budget. They're not funny, just real stories of how people have wasted budget. Do you want to start? Like, you've had such an expansive career, small, large. Do you think that there's one way that large companies specifically waste budget or tend to? Do you think there's a way that small companies tend to waste budget? What are your thoughts?
I think for small companies, just some of the things that I've seen is that they'll waste money trying to do things that aren't appropriate for the stage that they're at. So they'll buy merchandise and they're trying to focus on things that are very brand oriented when they really haven't even tied in what their ideal customer is and whether or not they have product market fit. And so the brand has no context. There's nothing to operate within or a realm that you can define. So I think on a small company, that's probably the biggest thing that I see happen most often is too much money on merch, which, by the way, VCs don't like. They don't want you spending all your money on silly stuff. They want you spending your money on actually accomplishing business objectives. So that's, small company. And then I think from a big company perspective, there's just such an opportunity for a waste. There's such an opportunity for things like, either not being well orchestrated across the different functions, or things where projects get started and just never fully executed because there's just so much going on and there's so much complexity in the organization. So I would say those are probably the two biggest things from those two different perspectives.
I mean, so I think that what I see carry on through a problem on both is too much collaboration, creating too much waste. So there has to be this point of, oddly enough, like in smaller companies, they want to do more collaborations, but you don't have time for everybody to give back the feedback that you want to do. And then I think there's an uncomfortable growth stage in large corporations when they have to decide that actually these people have to do it autonomously. I think that I remember to be fair, it was like the first time we were talking about multiple projects within one video. It was a big deal. We're still new to video. And you had to send this video to brand sign off. And there was a brand sign off that happened not in our time zone, once or twice a week. So you had to schedule in when you could do it. You have to get all of the people to do it. And then if you had any feedback, and also I'd say the sign off too for big corporations is where the sign off happens, because I was taking a finished video to brand sign off. There was no money left for feedback if they didn't like it. None. So what happens is, like, and my natural style of leadership is an influencing one anyway, but is what happens is there's so much time that happened before that sign off of me going to every single stakeholder to show them the video. Hey, and then also I'm like hype manning my project. Oh my gosh, do you want a sneak peek? Isn't it so cool? Like, look at this. So that the aim was that by the time you got to brand sign off, everyone has seen it, which was super important. And hopefully the last things that they wanted to fix were so minor. So it's like the brand sign off we had, I think, was at brief stage, I think script stage, but then almost completion, like you're done at the video, almost like your video is almost going to go to coloring, which is the last thing that happens and kind of your little stamp. And so it was such a dangerous stage to take it at, because if there was problems, there was no money to fix it. Everything had been allocated and so forth. So I think like trying to be too collaborative, trying to get sign-offs at the wrong spot is really expensive. And then I don't think we talk enough about time as a waste. I've mentioned this story before, but just one of my big lessons of last year, again, was listening to Stephen Bartlett at a really ace MailChimp conference and just talking about how much do we not think about the speed of decision making being able to move us forward. I really don't remember if I've talked about this before, Mark, so apologies if it's repeating, but this idea of like something I've really taken to heart in the last year is this kind of Jeff Bezos two-door decision making. If you can go through the door and come back with little harm done, why not? And I think that's a valuable thing when you think of budgeting, because you can say specifically, I learned this, right? If you can only go through the door, like you have to build something, you have to have a whole photo shoot, but you didn't think out your photo shoot correctly. And then when it happened, what you got back, nothing was usable. That's just a complete waste of time and money. But how do we start to make decisions faster, more autonomously, built more on trust? Do you create systems that are able to say this has been able to check mark? Okay, yes, this follows, you have a great thing of saying, here's 3 to 5. We're only focusing on these objectives. Yes, this is on this objective. Yes, this is the budget. This is the emergency fund. And then I would dare say these are try to keep the decision, the sign off people small and say you needed to be informed, but you didn't need to sign it off. Because you're just going to waste so much time, especially on a global team with time zones, with holiday, with all these things, that this time wastage is such a loss of budget. I just can't stress. And then you haven't learned as fast, you haven't deployed as fast, you haven't gotten better as fast.
Yeah, I really like that. I think in a prior episode we did talk about at the beginning of the project, who's responsible for it and who's informational only, who's contributing, kind of laying out those roles so it's really clear at the onset. I think that that's super important, and it's hard sometimes because people's feelings get hurt if they're not involved at the level that they think that they should be involved. But at the end of the day, you're right. Like just having a few people who are ultimately sign off authorities, the ones who legit could pull the project, that needs to be a really small group.
But when you talk about people's feelings being hurt because they think that they're the thing and they're not, I mean, I get it and I don't, but if it's clear at the very beginning, exactly. And it's also clear saying like, this isn't a good use of your time, I say that a lot to my
clients. I know.
And not to say, there's some decisions where I'm like, this is like, you've imagined a whole new thing and they've created a whole new world. For this particular project, this is not a good use of your time. Like, trust that I've done this before, and I trust that I absolutely will bring you in, or what, if you feel like you need to be aware, let's pinpoint at the beginning where you need to be aware early on or too late. But just that kind of space. But
yeah, I like that.
I find that part very difficult in the creative process. I think one thing that's really helpful, I think too, when we talk about like budget misspend within the creative process, is I like to have a separate, any feedback you get back, like we then dole it out into subjective and value added. If you want something to be a different color, that is totally subjective. Like, unless you can say, hey, we did a research in this color, great, fine. If you if you're like, actually, our voice book uses less words than more, so those 4 sentences could be like, here's an option for those 4 sentences to be a statement or 1.5. That's valuable, that changes things quite a lot. But I like to kind of take the feedback back and say, I'm only going to take value added feedback. And here's what I've determined is this and this. So if you don't, we're not going to do another round of sign-offs because you prefer it to be purple instead of green. You know what I mean? Which happens. And
it happens. It does happen
all of the time. And I think it's that management too, of trying to be able to say, whose feedback do I have to take? Is it valuable? I know, like, we did an animation for a big client a few years ago, and animation is a very interesting process. I'm not sure if you've gone through those before, but right. And it's like and I think it's the best possible example of how to like best manage your budget, because you say, look, we have to have a script. and we have to have wireframes. And then I forget the technical term, but there's like a GIF-like thing that kind of shows each frame in action. And each of these things have to be signed off first so it can go to the next stage. It's such a beautiful Gantt chart of a project. But it's also much easier to explain to your stakeholders to say, if you do not approve this right now, if you change this much, it's going to affect your budget by 30%. It's of the easiest kinds. It's like one of the more complex kinds of creatives you can create, but it's the easiest kinds to communicate of like where you're going to spend money.
That's true. That's true.
I think they're like with small companies, their risk of spending money, I think there's a high risk of spending money on the wrong place. And it's difficult because it's usually an idea from sales. And they're good ideas, but all of a sudden it's saying, let's take 40% of our annual budget on this one thing because I need this one person to see it. And you go, oh no. Or I think there's something like, we're going to create this one video or this one data sheet or this one thing, but then the waste happens because they never use it again. Those things aren't things from sales, by the way. I'm just saying there's all of these kind of things that are saying you spend a lot of time and budget on one thing, then you're sick of it because you've spent all of your time on it and you don't milk it for what it's worth. And you assume that everybody has seen it already, that you have to. Let me rephrase all of this. I think like the biggest mistake that small companies, maybe big companies do is assume that everyone has seen everything they've done.
Oh, that's profound.
Because they
haven't. We know they haven't, but they might, yeah.
But I think this comes up a lot with clients, with small companies, with scale ups, where you say, well, we've done that now. And I go, okay, but you've had 20 likes out of your 4,000 followers. Do you know what I mean? And it's like, that's not as robust as you think. And also from a decision-making status, your brain needs to see messages multiple times. A friend of mine just sent a couple months ago. They're now you need 24 hits.
I know.
Did you see that?
I did. The number keeps getting bigger and bigger because people are getting barraged with so many messages from so many different channels that it's just hard to stick out from the din. I can't tell you how many times folks have said, hey, we sent out an email and, we didn't get any conversions from it yet. And I'm like, because you sent out one email.
Yeah.
So, this is where the programmatic approach is really important. And also there's a little bit of education there when we're talking about social, because I think a lot of people don't understand that not all your followers see everything in their feed that you've produced. The algorithms will show your content to a portion of your followers, and then based on how well that is received, then it'll decide whether or not it's going to amplify that and share it with more.
Like on that basis, and again, happy to share personally, I follow apparently over 2,000 people on Instagram, which is crazy, or under. And I've decided I don't need to follow celebrities. It's the whole thing. We can discuss it later.
Okay.
But like, so as the thing is coming up, I've unfollowed, I'd say 20 celebrities now. Okay. So I'm still at the high, like 1,800 followers, whatever it is that I follow. And the amount that the change of 20 people have done to my algorithm is unbelievable. It's just the reduction of these 20 people who were famous, whatever, is completely different feed. It's a lot more enjoyable, first of all, but just, I think, like, to your point, even on LinkedIn, you don't see, if you have thousands of people, like, unless they've engaged with it, unless you force them to engage with it, they're not going to see it. These small, and also I actually want to point out too, that people probably don't realize when you go to your LinkedIn feed, it auto sets you at the top most performing posts or what you see. You have to go to the top and change it to recent to get the recent one. So it's telling you, we're going to give you what what we think you want to see, not just the most recent posts that have gone up. And so, yeah, I mean, obviously we could talk all day about this particular topic, but I think that's the thing, is there's this waste of like, oh no, it's gone now, everyone's seen it, we don't do it. And especially, like, I don't think until you're a big company, most people aren't paying attention to you also. So the risk is quite low. But I think anything you're building from a creative for a small company needs to be something that you're going to put out. Like, I love a good blog that's like a Q&A. First of all, it's good for SEO, but every single question in the Q&A can be a different social post that you're going straight back to the same article.
Yeah,
And,
same with listicles. I like that
oh yeah,
for that same reason. Yeah.
I haven't done a listicle in a while. That's a good idea.
They rank really well. Like they're one
Yeah,
of the top ranking types of content.
listicles.
Yeah.
That's the top tip today. No, it's true, but it's just like kind of squeezing your own content. So maybe that's my thought on this one is where small companies, it's not recycling yourself, not curating yourself enough, going for one big bang that is now what. And then I think for larger companies, for all of them, but more for larger companies, it's about that sign-off process and waste of resource and waste of people, which tends to be more about time of needing people's sign-off, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. The timing is always a challenge whenever there's complexity either in the scope or the approvals of a project. It's just, especially if you're just not getting the responses. I don't know about you. I mean, I've been at the point a couple of times where I'm like, okay, well, we're going without your approval because now we're on deadline and the event is in 3 days and we've lost the chance to iterate any further and we're going with it. I mean, it's an uncomfortable conversation, but if people don't make the time to do the reviews, sometimes you have to move forward without it.
But so much of that, I mean, you touched on it, but so much of it is about ego management. And like for the person typically higher up the ladder or within it, also learning about like, oh, the sky didn't fall after I didn't look at that, like, and they have to, I mean, that's my kind of feeling about it, is saying like, actually, when these things get delegated, we can scale. I think that's the thing of like having all these people to, you talk a lot about, is this scalable? Is this scalable? I think one of the number one things impeding scale is the number of people that have to sign things off.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And, the number of geographies that need to sign things off. We also haven't talked a lot about more like multi-language campaigns. I think that's also a very interesting thing. In it's a different topic, but they'll always like considering with budget, budget adjacent, like whether or not you're doing a localization versus translation.
Yeah, and there's a big difference there, and a lot of times people just don't really understand that those are not the same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a really big difference between them. I love working with native speakers as much as possible and getting all the colloquialisms and everything into the content, I think makes perfect sense. But a lot of people are like, oh, I could just translate this online and, save my translator fee. And, next thing you know, you've got.
No, you should never do that. You should always have a native person or local person do your reading. But I don't even mean translation by localization necessarily just in that space. I think it's also, if you're going into Italy, do you have an Italian company who is part of your campaign if you're doing case studies or local quote, And so in some ways, like the scale's harder because maybe, in your centralized hub, wherever that might be, they said this is the campaign. But here's the 5 major markets, and each of those markets needs to have their own case study. So then you have to go through those rotations of finding the right person and the right company or the spokesperson, which takes so much time.
It does take time for sure. And, imagery and videography sometimes flows into that as well, which can be not minimal.
Yeah.
There's definitely complexity there.
Have you used Gen AI for geographically different photographs, or is that now we're getting into a murky space?
They're geographically different. No, but I've used differences in the prompts for imagery depending on vertical market.
Okay.
For the same solution.
That's
so definitely have done that where I wanted the imagery to be different. I personally, over the past couple of years, haven't done a lot of international work. The companies I'm primarily working with are US based with US markets. But, at the end of the day, it's all about the ICP again. And,
Yeah.
making sure that all of the content, not just the narrative content, but all of the content applies to that ICP. So I think that's really critical.
I'm just thinking of like resource waste. I think time is the biggest one. I can't think of like, I can't think of another one that would be more tragic, I guess, you spend. I think it's also those are kind of, we talked about big bets before, and like what is a proportional big bet that you can do. I think it's being honest about your goals as well. There was as someone showed me like a deck of saying, oh, we're going to launch a podcast for this portfolio, and within the first month we're going to organically have 10,000 followers of like things that nobody had heard of. And I was like, nobody's heard of this, nobody's done that. And it just felt, and you're not being paid behind it. And so I think being realistic within the ROI expectations is also going to be like super important as far as avoiding waste or being realistic in your growth. And sometimes like anomalies come up and you are like, that was amazing, thank goodness. But I think otherwise it's just saying, how do we plan appropriately and what are the big bets? The other thing actually we haven't talked about is where you can save budget a lot is these collaborations, different partnerships. If you're going to share events, I think like we talked about kind of joining associations before, but I think a big thing is the collaborations of two partners hosting a dinner together or doing webinar together so that you can cross-function your different subject matter experts and be able to cross it from that way. And I think that that's always an interesting route to go, and being exposed to, I mean, to your point, hopefully the ICP you're looking for, but you're hopefully doing it in a way that like everyone can save a bit more money and get a bit more reach from doing being exposed to each other's networks.
Yeah, I love that. The whole perspective of partnerships and having it be win-win, where both entities wind up with a value add, and the cross population of their existing customer base or people who are aware of them and bringing that into each other's environment, I think is like super, super beneficial. I think, again, when we talk about waste, sometimes people will look at a partner and they're like, oh, this is the top dog, so this is the partner that we want. Really thinking through through the criteria and just say, no, what we want is the one where we're going to, have the biggest impact towards our, getting at the right customer at the right time with the right intent, who has the budget and, who's going to make a move. That is much more important than how big that brand is and whether or not they show an interest into it, especially if they're bigger. Especially if they're bigger than you, sometimes you can follow the brand. You get all excited about the brand, and at the end of the day, you're peanuts with all the other partnerships that they have, and you only get so much attention. Where sometimes if you can find a partner who's on par with you or at a similar stage that you are, and then you devote the same amount of energy into making that partnership work and then cross-populate your reach.
Yeah.
That to me is much more magical than looking to a, almighty big brand to solve your problems.
And the truth is when you have like this, when you're the scale up or startup and you're now going to be wanting to be associated with the bigger brand, I think my recommendation is try to get like a shared data sheet where all they have to do is put their logo on or something like this, where you can have both on it. But when you're trying to do events or webinars or something like this, you are very low on the totem pole. And what happens is because you want to look at important, you're going to bring 5 people to your meeting with the bigger brand. And it just ends up wasting a lot of time. And a lot of the time, I don't think people necessarily consider 5 people from your company, that's only 40 people, spending a half an hour. I don't think they consider that like we've just wasted 2.5 hours of people where we're basically just saying, please, please, please do this partnership with us or do that kind of thing. And so if you find somebody that has the attention, they can be bigger, but if they have the attention that they can give to you to execute and go faster, that's quite big. But all of that pandering you're doing just for some partnership activities sometimes like is a massive waste of resource when you can be doing direct to client or direct sales. I've also seen it in a funny stage with the very big corporates. We were doing like a really big research with a really big consultancy, and it was like a few rounds of deciding, well, whose contract template do we start with, because both brands were global companies. And so just even getting to start with saying, well, we need to start with our template. I go, no, we need to start with our template. And that's a funny, like, unknown that, I did not anticipate that at all. We're just trying to do research, and there's obviously all of this appropriate legal time that you need to take. I'm not saying in any way that's a waste, but it was a surprising kind of moment to be like, no, we're more important. Our template starts. No, our template starts. And then in that place, obviously, I very much leave the room and let the lawyers figure it out. But it's a very funny rotation that I didn't see coming, But it's a good point, I think it's good to point the partnership spaces and like when are you being taken care of, and how do you, it's an art to set up a really beautiful partnership ecosystem, right? That everyone's really collaborating appropriately.
Yeah. The assumption is if it's partnership that is long term, right? Because otherwise it would just be a project. It would just be a collaboration. If it's a partnership, then the expectation is this is going to be a long-term relationship. And, each party has to bring, their best to the table. And, there should be business objectives identified. And there's the orchestration of how we work together and the whole nine. And the less ego that's a part of that, and the more shared success that is a part of it, the better. And I find a lot of times that's easier to do with a company that's only one or two levels different from you, whether it's higher or lower. But, it can't be a 150x or 250x difference between who you are and who they are, because you're just not going to get the bang for your buck. You're thinking it's like this big thing, and you're willing to devote this huge amount of time and energy towards making it happen. And when they look at you, they're just like, yeah, you're lucky if they'll remember your name. You're in the database that, there's some guy who has you and 150 other companies like you in their charter of who they're supposed to manage. And if you're lucky, you'll get something out of it besides the logo on the sales sheet.
It's complex. It's really complex.
Yeah, there's complexity there. As with all things.
So drawing our budget series to a close, do you have kind of any wisdom or biggest takeaways you want to think of?
I think the biggest wisdom is something kind of organically felt. If you think that you're wasting time and energy and money, if you have a gut feeling that something's off, it's probably off. So listen to it. If you feel like something's priced too high, or it's not getting the attention that it deserves, or people aren't taking it seriously, or they're not bringing their best selves into that project, take a pause, reevaluate. And one of the best things that you can do is yank a project that's not working.
I agree with that. I think that I feel like making sure you stay in some kind of boundaries that you've created for percentages spent in different tactics, and making sure you're not getting too spent in one particular way, especially because ad spend and social spend can really get away from you. And it is something that you feel like once you start it, you can, if you can have the mindset of keeping it really focused, really learning focused, objective focused. I think that's helpful. Try not to waste each other's times when you've built a team that you really trust. And then I kind of want to leave this also. Try not to get too overwhelmed with the free opportunities that come up, because I think that too many of these sometimes can also really end up wasting your time as well. This opportunity to, if you send us this article, we'll put you here. If you send us this article, you put this here. And I think especially you got a lot of kind of spam for backlink kind of things, which sometimes are helpful, but it feels like an opportunity when it's just time focused, taken away from something else. So stay focused, get to a point where you can do that brand money.
Yeah.
The fun stuff, and use your partnerships and your skills wisely.
All right. I love it.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Mark. We'll
Thank
see
you.
you next time.
Okay, sounds good.
Talk about
All
it.
marketing and marketing for all.